Okay, well, welcome everybody, and we are going to get started. Sorry about that, I'm just trying to get my display set working fully. So welcome to this session. Because of the length of time, I did a poll before the session, so for those of you who haven't seen Orchestrator really before, this session might not be one that you come away with too much knowledge of Orchestrator, because what we're going to be doing is going to show you how you can use essentially a screen flow to replicate an orchestration. That's the point of this session here. So if you do want to know a bit more about Orchestrator and we don't really cover any questions or have time to, please feel free to come and grab me afterwards. I can tell you a lot more about Orchestrator, but we're not going to be able to cover that as such in this session because of time constraints. So just so you know, because I'm not going to kind of waffle through all of this screen, I've been in the ecosystem for Salesforce since 2016. I've been an admin, I've been a consultant, and I've basically been very active within the community. I recently co-founded Automation Dreaming, which Lilith, who's in our audience here, was one of our panelists at one of our sessions. Vicky, my co-founder, is also doing a session at this same time as well. So I've been very much involved in the automation landscape now for a couple of years. And most importantly, I guess you can probably tell by the t-shirt, I am a self-diagnosed flow addict. So that's kind of the main thing I want you to kind of take away from this kind of little bit about me. But let's get into what we're going to talk about for this session. So what we're going to look at in this session really is we're going to give you a bit of an overview of the demo use case. There is more use cases involved, but this is something that is fairly commonplace within Orchestrator, this kind of approach. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview on that. And then we'll go into the demo. And the demo I've got is you're going to see a variation of the same thing, one with an orchestration, one with a screen flow. So you're going to see essentially them both working more or less side by side. Hopefully time willing, we're going to give you a bit of, say, the screen flow. Hopefully time permitting as well, I can show you a little bit about of it under the hood, time permitting, and we'll look to wrap that off with questions and answers. And as well, if anybody does want to have access to some resources, I have put together a Google Sheet. I'll be showing this at the end as well, this link to there, but that's got some resources and blogs, it's got some trailhead stuff on Orchestrator, it's also got some general stuff on Flow as well. So we're going to do that as well. Now, so into the overview of the demo that we're going to be going through today. So basically, this fictitious company called the Mayflower Cafe, they take bookings for people to come in and use their facilities for like group events or just basically just small table reservations. And in the hypothetical sense, they're using Salesforce to manage these bookings. But part of that is they want to also ensure that they have the right coverage of staff to make sure that they are around. And one of the things they decided to try to implement recently was actually holiday cards. So as part of that, they want to make sure that if people are on holiday, that they ensure they find the right cover essentially for that. Because if you've been working in, say, a company like that, you'll probably know that if, say, somebody goes on holiday, you need somebody to probably potentially come in and fill in that slot when they're not available. So in this demo, what we're going to see is we're going to see a user make the request. We're going to see them being asked to submit it for approval, which is one of the common use cases of orchestrators to be using it for approvals at the moment. And then we're going to have their manager make a decision to approve it or reject it. So that's what we're going to see in here. Now, I'm going to go over to the demo. We're only 5 minutes in, so we should hopefully have time as well for questions as well. So let me just pull over my demo screen. Because of the way I've got this set up, I'm going to have to drag this across the screen, like so. Okay. And hopefully everybody can see that okay. So here we've got a holiday card record for our fictitious user called Catherine. And I'm just going to try and drag that across a little bit further so we've got a bit more real estate on the screen. And what we have here is we've got the holiday allowance. And what Catherine's going to do is just going to create a new holiday requests. You can see here we've got some requests that have been submitted. And you can see there's some test ones in there already as well that were pending approval. So FYI, these are using dynamic relay lists if you haven't used them before. So if you're not sure what those lists are, that's what they are. But we're not talking about dynamic relay lists here. So we're going to add in a new holiday request. And now my advice would not be to use this kind of pick list I've got here where you see demo scenario in a real life example, obviously. But this is done to actually trigger whichever option we're going with, whether it's the screen flow or whether it's the orchestration. Because one of my tips would be for Orchestrator, because this one's going to use a record triggered orchestration. And just to give a little bit of a brief, little bit on Orchestrator, just so you know, the reason for this kind of scenario is if you don't know about Orchestrator, what you get is 600 runs per year for free. And then after that, it is approximately $1 per run after that. Now, that can potentially be quite expensive for some organizations. My understanding is you can buy those in bulk, but you'd have to talk to an AE about that. But it's the current advertised scale is $1 per run after that. And Flow Orchestrator has a bit of a funny thing about what the runs are counted as. A run for Orchestrator is basically whenever it is triggered. That counts as a run. So even if you don't do it end to end, it still counts as a run at the moment. So that's also another reason for potentially looking at other methods to use that. Because if you say you refresh a page, say, let's just say 60 times, you refresh a page on a day, and you don't do anything with the orchestration, you've went through 60 of your runs in a day. Now, imagine you do that 10 days in a row, that's all of your runs in a year gone. Very quickly and very easily. So having to think about how you filter down your orchestrations to only run at basically certain conditions using filter requirements is, I would say, a recommended best practice for Orchestrator so that it doesn't trigger every single time you load your pages. So for this one, we're going to say Orchestrator, so you can actually see Orchestrator in practice. I'm going to put in Catherine as the fictitious user. The line manager, I'm going to stick in as me for this one. Date requested, we're going to leave that as it is. Start date, we'll say 1st of January. If I can click on that. And end date, we'll say the 6th, so that would be 2 days.
That's December.
It's December, very good spot. So let's say 3rd of January. And just for the purpose of this one, we're just going to say test for the reason. Nobody would obviously fill in a bit more information than just saying test. But for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to say test. So we're going to save that. And you'll see here, it's created the record. And you can see here, if we go to the Approval Request tab, you'll see here, we get an orchestration work guide. And this happens in stages and steps inside of Orchestrator. And for this one, we're going to say, I'm going to confirm that they're ready to submit. And this will submit that to approval. And you'll see there, once this page has finished off doing a little bit of a refresh on there, this will say that there was no work items on there because we've done everything that we need to do for the user making the request. Now, if I minimize this and come back to that in a second, I'm going to switch over to my Salesforce here, and we're going to go to the holiday cards here, and we're going to go back to Catherine's. So if we go back to our related, you'll see here we've got our holiday request for the 1st of the 1st. And you can see here it's the same record that we just created. We're going to click on the approval request, and you can see here that we have a fairly simple flow. And there, this is a screen flow within the orchestration. And we're going to just say, yes, that's fine to approve that. We're going to confirm the decision. And we'll just give us a little message to say, yes, that's fine. We'll close that, and again, we'll see that we've got no more work items for this particular request. Now, if I go back to the one for Catherine and refresh the page, you'll see here that there'll be no work items because the holiday has been approved. So let's create a new one so you can see the difference between this and a screen flow. So we're going to go back to our related. Going to click on new, and we're going to choose the demo scenario flow, screen flow. Put this down as Catherine. We're going to say the line manager again is me. If I was going to clean this up, I'll probably try to do this, have this all automated in, but I have not got that for this session. So what we're going to do here, let's just say 1st of February was the time requested. Let's just say the start date. Let's just say 1st of March, end date. Let's do Friday the 2nd of April, or 2nd of March. So 3rd of March, can't read my own dates. And we'll do again, just do test. So this will show you a variation of the same approach, but inside of a screen flow. So we come here, we've got the same screen flow here that we saw before. These two variations of the flow are all using exactly the same elements as we have shared within each other. I'm going to say that for Catherine, let's just confirm this request. And the record has been successfully updated. So that's been submitted. And you'll see here, we've got an extra little bit here. This is something that we sort of can do for an orchestration, but it can easily do this with ScreenFlow, because what you can see here is we've got some text here saying, you are not the manager of this particular user, therefore you can't do anything else at this stage. So we've got a little message here. Okay, all of your work for now is done, but we can't proceed with the next task because you're not the correct user. And we are basically blocking this user from doing this inside of the screen flow. Now if I go back to Catherine here, go back to the records, I'm just going to refresh this. So we should now be able to see the one for the 1st of March, and we'll come back here. We're getting the same screen flow again, but it's inside of seeing the screen flow. So we're just going to say this is approved. And again, we're seeing the same message we did before, just to keep it all consistent. We'll click on close, and then you can see there that we've got a decision has been made. And now if I was to go back to Catherine's page here and just refresh, you will see here that the same message that a decision has been made. So we've actually, within the ScreenFlow version, we've actually added an extra little bit to kind of give extra messaging. This is stuff you could do in an orchestration if you wish, but this approach keeps it within one flow, whereas with an orchestration, these messages here would potentially have to be in a separate flow entirely. Now, just going to do a quick time check. It is 1:15, so we have 15 minutes left, so that the demos went quite well there. So we should have time for questions. So let me just pull up on here, and I'm going to show you the flows underneath the hood. So if I go into my flows, over here, now what we want to see is you'll see here we've got a load of flows here for this. So we've got the orchestration, which is here. So this might be the first time you're seeing Flow Orchestrator. So I'll give a brief kind of very quick whistle-stop overview of this so you can understand what's going on here. So Orchestrator is broken down into stages and steps, and within a step you have the option of using two types of flows. You have what is referred to as a background step and an interactive step. An interactive step is a screen flow, and it has to be a screen flow that already exists within Salesforce. So you've created it, and then you add that to the orchestration. Interactive step is an auto-launch flow, so it can't be record triggered. It has to be an auto-launched flow inside of that. So it can't be schedule triggered either. It has to be the specific type of auto-launched. And what we've got here is we've got two flows here. We've got the interactive step, which was that screen flow where you saw where the user was asked to confirm that the request was being made. Then we have a background step, which submits the request for approval. And this is just done automatically, and you can see here, it just works with the record ID for that. And then we have an interactive step here. Now this is also quite an important bit here. So you can see what the record is that we're working with, which is the record ID for the holiday request. We're specifying what page this is appearing on, which is again the record ID for the holiday request. And then we've got these options here for assignee type. Assignee types, there's 3 different types. However, it might sound confusing when you first read because there's 2 different versions of each type inside of here. So you've got types of a user, a group, or a queue. And for each one, you've got a variation of that, which is called a resource. If you went for, say, just the user and not the user resource, it would pull up a lookup component where you could select the user as you would normally do with any standard lookup component. Whereas a resource is asking for a variable that is assigned within the flow. So in here, you can see here, we've got using it from the record, and we're putting in the line manager, and we're getting their username. Very important with the user side, and if anybody does ask the question, I don't know what the answer to this is, because I love to pick Salesforce's brains to find out. But for a user resource, it has to be the username. For groups and queues resources, it's the ID. Now, I don't know why it was put as a username rather than a user ID. So again, I say if everybody asks that question, I do not know the answer. I'd love to pick the PM's brains, and I go, why do we not go for ID and keep it consistent? But as you can see here, this is a very simple orchestration with 3 flows in here. And just in our last 10 minutes, I'll show you the guided process. I'll show the flow, and then we'll open up for questions. And this is the screen flow version. Looks a lot different. One thing you'll notice here is we're actually using quite a few decision elements here. So the first decision element here basically checks what the current submission status is of the request. So it basically says, is the request status pending? If it is, it will go down this side of the tree. And then what we've got is we have a decision here to say, is the user accessing the flow? Is it the person who made the request? Or is it somebody else? If it's not the person who requested, they will get an error message there to say, or if it's not technically an error message, just to play a text component, but they'll get a message there to say, you're not the user who requested this leave. At this stage, you can't do anything with this. And then it'll come on here for if it's the requester, it'll pull up a subflow, which is the same screen flow you saw there. So we're using subflows in here to work in the same way as what we've got for an orchestration. So we're using subflows to kind of handle that templating of flows so we can bring them across. And what we'll do is, if they've confirmed, we'll then set the confirmation value. And then at this bottom end here, didn't really necessarily need this as such, but I've put this in as a safety gap just to cover for any unforeseen issues where it says, yes, has this been, the confirmation decision been made by the user? Have they ticked that box and said yes? If they have, then go down to the submit request, which is the auto launch flow, which will submit, and then they can check. And you can see here, we've got a screen here to say, yes, the record has been submitted. And at the end, we send a notification to the manager through a custom notification, which you haven't seen in this demo for that, but we send a notification to the manager to say, Catherine submitted a holiday request, go here to make a decision. And then on the other side of the tree, where if the decision isn't pending, it then checks, is the person accessing the flow the line manager of the user? If it is, it'll pull up the subflow, which is that screen flow, say, please make a decision. If it's not, they get this message there to say that you're not the manager of the record, and then they can, and if the decision has been made as well, it just pulls up on that screen flow there. So this model is ever so slightly more complex than the orchestration side, but it actually shows how you can create an orchestration using a screen flow. So hopefully that kind of covers it a little bit. We do have a decent amount of time left for questions if anybody has any questions. Also as well, if anybody does want some, I have some swag in my bag. I have admin skills kit trading cards, which I've got 8 left. So if anybody wants one, I will more than happily give you one as well. Cool. And I think, do we have any questions? Yes.
Where do you see the big advantage of the orchestra flow? Because I'm really familiar with this flow thing, and for me, I don't feel like an advantage.
So if I understand the question, the question is kind of where do you find orchestration within Flow Builder? Is that correct? What the advantage? Yeah. So. I don't know if I should really say this, but I don't think there is as much of an advantage within orchestration. There is use cases where it would be more beneficial. So, for example, a scenario I can think of is if you need to, say, launch a screen flow after a record triggered flow, after a record trigger needs to happen, that would probably be a good use case for orchestration because you can't daisy chain screen flows and record trigger flows together without doing something in between, whether it's using a coded method or whether it's using, say, an auto launch flow to fire an update that will then trigger a screen flow or something like that. So that's an example of a use case. I do quite like Orchestrator in terms of like how it can daisy chain flows together in that way. But in terms of a big business use case, I haven't seen too much of that really coming to light just yet. If you looked at that poll, probably about 75% said they haven't used it yet. And I think that's probably quite consistent across the ecosystem. Some big companies are using it and using it really well from what I understand. But I haven't seen that many kind of like medium to smaller companies using it, mainly because of the cost implications. And that's a big drawback of that. But I would say the main advantage, if there was one, was basically putting flows together and having where you could do things like having a record trigger flow, fire a screen flow, for example. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question a little bit. But that's a tough one to answer when you don't have all the data yet to see what the uptake has been. Cool. Any more questions? There. Cool.
Yeah. So I haven't really looked into Orchestrator that much, but I remember that there used to be, I think it was a feature of Service Cloud, where you had like the lightning engagement or something that you had multiple flows that you needed to kind of, I think in a similar fashion are steps that you needed to walk through and you could pause them. Is this going to be incorporated in Orchestrator? Is this part of Orchestrator?
Yeah, so I don't really know much about that particular framework from experience what you're mentioning there, but in terms of orchestration, what you could do, because you can use decision elements inside of Orchestrator. So you could use a decision element essentially to go, okay, we want to check this value. If this value is true or false or whatever the parameters are, then stop the flow. So you could essentially use a decision element to essentially replicate almost like a pause almost. But with it also having screen flows, you can also have the pause button on there, so you can pause it manually. So there's things that you could do with that. And I think that is time. So thank you very much. Let me just quickly, ever so slightly, share that. If anybody hasn't seen it, just one more time. I'll pull up that. Where is that? There we go. So if anybody hasn't got that just yet, I'll very quickly share that in the last 30 seconds. So you can grab that QR code for those resources. Great. Thank you very much.